My name is Jim Colonna. I'm a composer, and this is my YouTube channel. So I'm happy to be discussing and talking about my new symphony, The Pursuit of Happiness. What led me to write this work? I had spent some time thinking about the state of the world, and I know it sounds really deep, and as I explain this, it's going to sound a little less deep maybe. Thinking about how the world was in conflict constantly. In our own country, this battle between people who believe one side or believe the other politically, mass shootings, the idea that we pick up a gun to solve our problems instead of actually talking to each other, the fact that people fail to live to their own commitments, causing turmoil, causing a lot of grief, a lot of suffering for people that they love even. And I was thinking about this, and then I was also thinking about the fact that when people write music about these situations, about this current state of chaos, they end up writing music that is dark and gloomy, and what I say is Mahlerian. You know, it's like a Mahler symphony, like Symphony Mvt, filled with tragedy, with the loss of his children, hammer blows with the fear of his own death coming, all of those things, so dark all the time, everything's so heavy. And then I started looking around and I noticed there were composers much younger than myself, in their 20s, writing super dark pieces as a response to what was going on around them. And I questioned the mental health and the mental well-being of those composers and why this is what they're choosing to write. I mean, yes, youth is lost on the youth. That is true. And now I'm at a point in my career and in my life where I look back and I see these things and I wish I could go back and have the feelings and emotions and power and happiness that I've come onto throughout aging and becoming who I am back in my 20s, when I could have seen it a lot differently back then. And I think that the composers that are writing these dark pieces are not writing poor pieces of music, but they're so very, very, very heavy, and that's concerning. So I decided that if I was going to write a large form work like a symphony, I was going to make it optimistic, because I had this question in my head of, why can't we write optimistic music? There has to be tension and repose in every piece, but tension doesn't have to be extreme darkness. Tension can be written in such a way of just using dissonant intervals that are spaced far apart. It doesn't have to be this idea that everything around us is crumbling down. Now, I do not profess to be a happiness expert. I do not profess to say that I've solved it all and I have immense happiness in my life. We all have waves and flows and ebbs and tides of happiness. I think the biggest thing for us is to pursue it, to do the best that we can to hold on to it when we have it, and realize that sometimes things come in waves. And in the score note, I mention that I was so tired of death scrolling through my phone. And you scroll through and you see bad things politically, bad things happening with children, bad things happening with people. And the news cycle is constantly the negative, constantly, because it's not news if it's good. It's only news if it's bad, because it shocks you and scares you and puts you into positions of defense, puts you in positions of judgment of others. And I was doing that on a really, really regular basis, and started to fall into a deep depression. And I decided one day, I can't do this. This is not how we need to be. I'm a big person who believes in Alan Watts, and I read and follow Ram Dass and his teachings. And yes, they've gone before us. They're no longer with us. But it's very interesting that the things they talked about in the 1960s, 70s, 80s, and 90s is still happening today, only at a much faster pace. With the cell phones, with the laptops and all the social media, we can find ourselves instantly unhappy. And then we spend our time looking at, in my opinion, relatively stupid entertainment that makes us happy. You know, fail videos and people falling into these tragedies that are, you know, put to a soundtrack of laughter or a soundtrack of something that's light, and it's just not funny. So I decided that I was going to write a piece that's filled with optimism. And didn't know it was going to be a symphony because I'm afraid of that form. And at the time I was afraid of that form. The symphony is a major monumental form in instrumental music. And if we think about it, Beethoven wrote great symphonies, Mahler, Strauss, fantastic symphonies, Leonard Bernstein, great symphonies, Copland's Third Symphony, David Diamond's works, all of his symphonies, all these wonderful composers writing these pieces. And in the band world, we have plenty of symphonies, some not great, some okay, some artistically inspired, aesthetically inspired, some of them functional. But we have these pieces and they're there, and I was intimidated by these grand works, and I thought, how could I write a symphony? Especially when I was younger, I used to think about that. And I decided, okay, well, I'm not going to call it a symphony. I'm just going to call it a long form work and not tell anyone else that I'm doing it. And decided that it was going to be all optimistic music from the start. So when I started the piece, I started in California, sitting in a booth where I was working with students to recruit people to our college. And there comes these, again, ebbs and flows of people walking through the hall, and it got very silent at one point. So I thought, okay, well, let's see what I can do. So this was January of 2024, and I sat down and music just started to happen. And I kept telling myself, okay, so now you've started this. You have a choice. You can either go to your default and hurry through this and just get it done because it needs to be done and you're excited about it, or you can be honest with yourself and make sure that everything that you write is intentional and authentic to you. And I chose that route, so much so that I would put notes in the score as I was writing it that would say, stop here, don't go any further. You're going to just repeat yourself musically, think through this. How does it develop? Take your time. And those are all things that I've been horrible about my entire career. I like to start, finish, and get done like it's a race. And I need to make sure that I'm first, not always the best. And when I say the best, I don't mean better than someone else, but the best to me. So I began in January, California Music Educators. And then I proceeded to tell myself one movement a month. The first movement is called The Seeker. And the idea with The Seeker is that we are seeking happiness. We're searching for happiness. My wife had referred to me to a wonderful podcast called The Happiness Project, that is a Happiness Lab, that is put on by Dr. Laurie Santos from Yale University. And I listened to episode after episode to the point where even now I can't wait for Monday just to hear it. It's all different ways of finding our happiness. And she has wonderful guests, sometimes guests that I don't care for, like any other podcast, but she's seeing the world through this idea that we are responsible for our own happiness. And this external world that keeps invading our world comes in and removes some of our joy. Even in the field that I'm in music, we often compare ourselves to other people. I want my name in the spotlight for this long. And it's really important. If I fall out of the spotlight, I'm out of favor. I don't get played as a composer or as a conductor. I don't get opportunities to conduct. And then you compare yourself to someone else. Well, why is this person getting this and I'm not? You can see this on Facebook pages, composers complaining about their position in their world. And there are people that look at what we do and would love to do what we do, and yet we are constantly comparing ourselves to others, not feeling good enough, not feeling artistic enough, expressive enough. Not the field, especially in band, has a tendency to flow towards flavor of the month type of attitude. This young composer who is 19, 20, who's writing this really hip, cool music, whatever that may be, we gravitate there and we say, we're going to do that. That's important. But is it? Will that music last? Will that composer mature and write something much better? And could be either way. You can have a flash in the pan, something that happens really young, and you could have something that just takes time and growth and a level of expression that changes with life experience. Obviously, if you're looking at this beautiful gray hair, I've had lots of life experience. And I've seen the birth of my children, I've lost both of my parents, I've been through rough times in relationships, I've been through life. And even with the negative, I can still find the positive in things, and I wanted this symphony to be that, so I'm seeking happiness. The second movement is all about expression of lost love and lost happiness. So when I look to the sky and see the stars, and they are pouring their love down upon us, that is that moment where, I go in the backyard and I lay in the backyard in my chair and I stare at the sky, and it's so beautiful and so peaceful. And I think about the fact that I am so small in all of this. And it's not about me, it's about us. It's about we. And the stars represent the infinite possibilities of where our happiness really is. It is true that there are other places in this world where there's war going on more than the United States, different kinds of wars in the United States, where people are being killed on a regular basis in mass extinction in some ways. And it's super sad that that's happening. And it's hard to find happiness. And even though I studied this idea, and Ram Dass says that within suffering there is joy, within suffering it's just part of the journey, I don't know what it is to suffer like some of those folks are suffering in war, in famine, and mass shootings. So I need to be grateful for what I have right in front of me. And that second movement is what I consider my most expressive thing I've ever written. And it is all gratitude, and it is all beauty. It represents every single person I've ever loved in my lifetime, romantically or universally or unconditionally. And it represents the highest form of expression that I can make within that flow of consciousness. And that's important to know about this piece, that everything I wrote was a flow of consciousness. My intuition drew me to the sounds that I would then apply my skills to. Now, any composer will tell you that, but we don't hear that often from composers. The third movement, just play. One of the things that we fail to do is we see our lives as being super, super serious. I do it all the time. And as I said at the very beginning of this, with the first movement, I have been through some really, really terrible things recently after the completion of the symphony that has crushed my soul and torn my heart to pieces. However, if I choose to stay in this state, then I'll never learn to play again. And I think it's important we realize, and in the end, whatever this fleshy existence is, if we just play with what's in front of us, we could enjoy so much more if we approached it as a child, in playfulness. That movement, that third movement, is actually very interesting, that it was not something that I was originally writing for the symphony. It's actually a piece that I wrote for various chamber ensembles. One ensemble took summer dance with them to Europe and did a tour, and another chamber ensemble has done local United States performances of the woodwind trio version. And I was talking to a fellow composer, John Berners, who teaches at Indiana University in Indianapolis, I believe. And he and I were talking once, and he heard it. He said, "This would really make a good large ensemble piece." And I just couldn't hear it. And then I thought, you know what? It would. And it's exactly what I'm looking for. Something that is light, that is a scherzo, that's a joke, that is fun, and it's just about playing and cleverness. And that movement is all about that. Do we just play? The last movement, Be Here Now, that is Ram Dass's major statement on life. His book, Be Here Now, was written way, way, way back in the 1960s. I read the book thinking that it was supposed to be a book you sit down and read, but it's not. It's a book that you open it up and you read a thought, you read a prayer, you read something, and you realize, if I'm just in this presence at this moment, everything is fine. And the reality is, if you put yourself in this moment, everything is fine. When you think about the past, you suffer in depression about things that weren't right. If you focus on the future, you give yourself great anxiety about what you think you should be. And we don't need to be anything that anyone expects us to be. We need to be what we are right now, our authentic selves. Be here now. And I say this all the time to students that come into my office. I say to them, if you would just take a deep breath and say, I am here now. And you repeat that even 3 times with your eyes closed. When you open your eyes, you won't believe how different your senses perceive your environment. Being here now, not on your phone looking for something that is not in your presence. The musical concept of the piece is a little different than what I'm used to. So I'm a big fan of Georgi Ligidi's music. And I think when you hear the symphony, you'll say, there's no way. I'm a big fan of Paul Hindemith's music. Again, you're going to think there's no way. I'm also a fan of Fisher Tull in the band world. I'm a very big fan of what Persichetti did structurally. I'm not always moved by Persichetti's choices, but I do think what he did structurally is fascinating. Ingolf Dahl's music, absolutely fantastic music. So yes, these are all old dead composers, wonderful composers of the past, but I've always been intrigued by their music. And one of the things that intrigues me is two things: the form and structure of their music, and the intervallic and melodic content of their music, mostly the intervallic content. So I spent a lot of time in my career as a band composer writing music that I thought was music people wanted. For instance, I really enjoy Mark Camphouse's A Movement for Rosa. So I enjoy it so much that when I want to write a piece that I would like to have played, it's Movement for Rosa Part 2 or Movement for Rosa Light. It's nowhere near the quality of that composition. Right? I love Leonard Bernstein's music, and I have pieces in my past that are very much just like Bernstein. That's me paying homage to my elders. That's me showing respect to those composers. But it wasn't me expressing myself. It was me expressing my respect and love and imitation of them. And I acknowledge that. I will never say that that's not the case, because my goal as a composer, that you can find in other YouTube videos, was to bring this music to younger players so that it's not forgotten, so that we don't go into band world and just play band world music, that we actually know what's happening outside of the classroom, what real music is going on. Not that band music's not real, but a good amount of it is geared towards a certain thing. And you can decide on your own what that is. I decided that in this piece, I was going to take my time and I was going to commit to intervallic content. Just like Beethoven's Symphony No. 5 in C minor. The first movement is in C minor, and then we transport ourselves all through different versions of C. I decided that what I was going to do is I was going to use my favorite intervals in this piece. And my favorite intervals are a major seventh, which I love. Right, I think that is a great sound, right? So you get that. There's a lot of tension there. And then resolve it up a second. And then from that F, think in a tritone. And then resolve that up a half step. So the piece is really based on each movement uses those sets of intervals in a different way. And it's a different type of variation. But I wanted to commit to something that I've not done before in a piece, where before I thought about the structure. Here's your A, here's your B, here's your A. How do they interact? And we're out. In this case, I'm thinking about how do I allow these intervals to be present in all keys, as many keys as I wanted to go into. But that interval and the contents of those intervals become motives and become melodies, become harmonic structure. It always has a role from beginning to end. So in the first movement, the first time you really realize that's happening is when we have the horn solo. And when that happens, you're like, oh, something's going on here. And then eventually it bursts into that great orchestration and fanfare that's very reminiscent of the music of John Adams. So yes, my influences are not hidden in this music. Huge John Adams fan. My love of heavy metal with Dee Snider and Twisted Sister, and it's just, there's something about that rawness that's in that first movement. The second movement, I take the same intervals and I make it a melody. Right, so you hear that as a melodic source, and those intervals are present there. And the third movement, even though it was not written as part of the symphony, I realized I do that a lot in that movement as well. So it must be intervals that are very natural to my ear. And in the last movement, purposely send it out as a euphonium solo. So the idea was to just make sure that that motive, those intervals, that distance and that closeness both matched. Now, when I mentioned those other composers at the beginning of this, what I mean is if you look at something by Ligeti, say for instance, Mysteries of the Macabre, the trumpet version, the soprano version, whatever you're looking at, intervallically, it's very clear what he's doing. We've got the major seventh, we've got the ninths, we've got the minor seconds, and they're just interplaying in the way that he weaves his material. But it's very clear that that's what's happening, right? In his work for piano originally, and then later on, it was an accordion. He has a piece that in the first movement is all A's. And people if you tell them it's just A the whole way through, they would laugh at you. But it's so amazing. All we're dealing with is an A. So is a unison an octave? Is an octave a unison? Well, I believe it is. Are seconds the same as fourths, major seconds? Sure. Major sevenths, same as minor second? Sure. Pitch class set, right? The comparable pitches back to each other. And that's really important to me in this piece. And I wanted to see what I could do with it and expose it and draw it out. All my harmonies are structured on it. My favorite sound is a major 7 chord. I really love this sound. In a piece that I wrote after my father passed away, Conversations with the Inner Child, the melody does, the harmonic structure is that, major 7s. The piece is getting lots of performances. I finished it in June, which means that the timing was terrible to get it into conductors' hands, because in June, everybody already knows what they're programming next year at the college and university band programs, military band programs. They already have their idea of what's happening. Luckily, I had a couple people jump on it, and they were pretty excited about programming it this year, which is a nice thing to have happen right away. Otherwise, I was expecting all of this to wait for one more year. So Yale University, where Laurie Santos teaches, and Tom Duffy, the composer and conductor, happens to be the director of bands there. I sent it to him regarding the connection to Yale with Laurie Santos, and I got an email back a couple hours later after he listened to the piece, and we were on. So the world premiere is going to be November 15th at Yale University of the entire symphony. The symphony then goes to Arkansas Tech the following week. I'll be in residence at both places. In Arkansas Tech, we'll be doing a recording session of the piece, and then a concert to follow the recording session. I will be in San Diego at San Diego State with Shannon Keitlinger and his fantastic ensemble. And anytime I get to go West Coast, that speaks to me. So I'm looking forward to going out there and being with Shannon and his group when they prepare the piece. And then in future years, it'll be performed at UNLV with Tom Leslie. It'll be performed at University of Northern Colorado with Wesley Broadnax, Temple University, Penn State University. It's going to be performed quite a bit. And I'm really excited because, again, I wasn't one of those composers in my 20s who was doing this type of thing. I was doing something totally different. So here I am on a extremely exciting symphony tour, in a sense. So I'm trying to be at every place there's a premiere. Hopefully as an artist in residence, hopefully as someone who can talk to the students. But the first time human beings are ever going to hear the piece live will be at Penn State on October 18th. The thing that's really cool about the Penn State performance is the conductor, Tanya, is unable to program the whole symphony this year. So that's on the docket for next year. But the first movement, The Seeker, is going to open her concert. And the concert is a little bit about the polar differences between the pursuit of happiness and depression. So my friend and fantastic composer Joel Puckett's piece will be performed at that concert as well, and I'm looking forward to hearing that live. That's what's happening so far. And as that piece starts to grow and we get more performances and more live concert performances instead of using the MIDI playback, which is decent, but I can't wait to hear human beings do it, then I'll start to be able to send it out to other conductors who would rather not hear MIDI playback, and hopefully see it get performed even more next year. But I'm very, very, very grateful, filled with gratitude that someone would see my music and say, this is important. And the program note spoke to them so much. I think it's absolutely incredible that this is happening, and I'm happy to share my joy with anyone who wants to experience that joy. There will be a recording. Arkansas Tech will have a recording that comes out. It'll be on a commercial label. More on that. I'll make sure that I post it on my social media. I'm primarily on Facebook and Instagram. I don't TikTok because the last thing you want to see me do is dance. I know it's not just about dance, but not into all of that. And my distaste for social media, as you heard earlier in this video, means that I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time there. But I do know that I have to promote and get the piece out there, because anyone who performs the piece is sharing happiness and joy with their audience. And that's really the intent of the work, to maybe celebrate what we have after our election coming up in a month, and then the 2 performances that happen right after that, I'm a little nervous. It could be that I'm going to have to dig deep to find that personal gratitude, that personal joy, that personal universal and unconditional love, because things are going to change in the United States one way or the other, and it's going to be temporary, I hope, and I hope that we can find a way to find inner peace. Happiness is something that we should see in front of us, something that is present in the now. Happiness is something that during the listening of the piece, I hope our audiences, our performers, our conductors feel at peace in the present, creating a transcendental experience for those that are listening to the work. That is my goal. I'm very excited that people have responded so positively to it, and I'm hoping to continue to do this. I don't know if there will be a Symphony number 2. Right now the answer is no. That's a lot to do, to write a symphony, and to commit and to be honest with yourself and to not let yourself just rush through whatever technician you have on over. There may be a Symphony number 2, but I know there will be a very large scale work coming in 2026, and it's going to be a pretty big thing with multimedia, with orchestra, with pre-recorded choirs, and that topic is to be released later. So I hope you'll stay with me, and in 2026 I can talk more about the new piece, this large scale work, and hopefully I'll be talking about it in a way that is getting some serious performances. So I thank you very much for paying attention to this video. If you tuned out early, go pursue your own happiness.